Now, you told me that, let's hear some of your background. I'm interested in what brought you here. You originally, you lived in South Bronx.
No, I was raised in the South Bronx. So born and raised in Harlem, the Bronx, South Bronx, and Queens, New York. So, and then from there, I relocated to Washington, D.C. And that was about 1976 when that happened. So they didn't even have transportation. And I stayed there. I worked numerous jobs. Um, I would go to meetings, and council people would want to know who's that at the end of the meeting, and they'd have their people come and get me because they said I showed no emotion during their speeches, which I used to think was so funny. They couldn't read me. But what got me here was I was looking for a change. And it was really during the prime of the real estate boom in Washington, D.C.
Why were you looking for a change?
To tell you the truth, I was burnt out from the politics in D.C.
So you were
Because
always interested in politics.
it started, I guess, about 2002, and a retired White House correspondent was living in my neighborhood, heard me speak at a meeting, and then he started, I guess, trying to recruit me to become the public safety liaison for the area. And that area was known as Fort Lincoln. And Fort Lincoln is a historical site where the Bluecoats dragged a cannon all the way up the hill to protect the city of Washington, D.C. They never got to really engage in the war. And there is a beautiful photo of, I think, was it General Shore, and he led the black troops. And there's a picture of them standing in front of what the original Fort Lincoln looked like. So that was a community of about 2,000 people, 600 senior citizens. And this gentleman kept pursuing me, and I kept saying, I don't want to be involved. So eventually, he said, just come to one meeting. And I came to one public safety meeting, and you had the captain of the precinct there, you had detectives, and you had police officers because they wanted to do that community, get the police officers involved in the community and for the officers to know who the community leaders and activists were. So I became a part of the association. And that's what pretty much got me into it. And then I eventually became the spokesperson because now that person who died was the president. So he died. Then the person that took his place, that person died. And the next person that got voted in to be the president of the association was Regina Russell. That was a big experience. So I,
You burned out.
yes, when I got here, I was burnt
Why
out.
Sunbury? Tell me why Sunbury.
My grandchildren. I had a young granddaughter that was 8, and I had one that was she, when I got here, I think she was 6, and the other one was like 14. And I wanted to be involved. They were females, and I wanted to be involved in their lives and just be able to show them another part of the world, another way of thinking. And you got to get them during those fundamental years for them to grasp onto things without really questioning you. Yeah.
So you came here. Did you find this area welcoming?
Well, in the beginning, yes, it was welcoming. Yes. Um, um, my friends called it Mayberry. They would come, and when they drive here, they say, "Oh, I can see why you moved here. The scenic view, the mountains, the rivers, everything is beautiful. But why are you here? There's no black people." And I was like, "That's what I like about it." I was very comfortable that there were not a lot of black people because it's one thing that I learned in politics. or when you're doing community work. White people go to meetings. And in a lot of communities, and I sure don't want to get beat up for this, black people don't usually go to meetings. So therefore, that's why their communities are not policed as well as the white communities are.
I remember some of your early meetings, though. I get the impression, and I could be wrong, but you weren't treated all that well. I mean, do you remember maybe the first time you felt discriminated against or
I have
racism against?
never seen the behavior that I saw when I came here. I could not believe, and it did take me a long time to understand how they could be so rude and almost dehumanizing you as a resident and taxpayer. I did not identify it as racism at first. I I looked at it that I was a newcomer and I didn't know who the players were, and they wanted to put me in my place. It wasn't until maybe a couple of years later when I was in a meeting and it was like a brick fell out the sky and hit me in my head because there was no there wasn't the same respect that I saw in other cities for your elected officials. You would say Commissioner Brown, you call them by their last names. You never called them by their first name. And I started noticing that most of the people were addressing the elected officials, including the mayor, by their first name. And yes, they were not very kind to me. I can recall one time yelling out, I am not a buffoon, because they would always try to tell their private jokes where the audience is laughing at me and I'm not really getting my point across, which I probably did because if it's in the minutes, I could get my point across, but nothing was going to be done about it.
Yeah, as I recall, you demanded to be heard, and they weren't used to that.
Thank you.
Uh, but outside council meeting, just life around here, uh, do you feel this area is welcome to people of color? And maybe not, maybe Sunbury more than other areas around here, but
Um, I think that the more diversified the city got, I'm going to say no. And I'm saying that because people were very kind to me, and some people wanted to know me because they actually said, you're the first black person I've ever come in contact with. Because I was going to night pool, I was going to the Y, I was volunteering in a group up at the Sunbury Hospital. I was doing things to try to get involved in the community and finding that I was the only person in Sunbury of color attending these meetings, you know. So again, I didn't initially look at it at race, but sometimes at the city council meetings, when I would turn around to look at the audience, people would be going like this. And so I guess they're telling me that's the color of my skin. That's the only thing you can say if you're not getting a good response from your elected officials who you're trying to talk to.
have you ever felt endangered because of your outspokenness
Yes.
or your color?
Yes. And yes, when I started, like you said, demanding that I be heard, and it's not as much as heard, I want it to be listened to. You got to listen to somebody. You know, we all have hearing. And strange things started happening, like bags of cigarette butts dumped in front of the house, a dead cat, just phone calls telling me to go back to Harrisburg. And I'm like, I'm not from Harrisburg. Why would you presume I'm from Harrisburg? And that didn't even click, that Harrisburg must have been mostly black because I wasn't that familiar with the areas. But um, I had a police officer that was sent to my door. He was not dispatched to come here, but he came to my door to threaten me to stop going across the street and complaining about that property. And I'm like, how can somebody come and tell you you can't walk on a public sidewalk? But things like that was happening, and uh, if the police officer is going to come and threaten me, then what protection do I have as a single minority woman living in Sunbury?
So you've had those experiences.
Yeah, I've
Did
had
it make
some
you
experience.
angry?
Yes, and it made me continue going to those meetings. I was like, well, if they think they're going to run me away, they got the wrong person. So, yes, I would continue going to the meetings. But I'll tell you something my mother said to me one time. She said, Black people have always been terrorized. So when people think they're going to terrorize you and scare you with some ugly, mean tactic, it really doesn't scare you. You have that moment where you have to think, you know, but then you have the drive to continue going because, again, like you said, I was determined to be heard and not ran away. I had a right to be there. I'm a taxpayer. I own my home. I moved into this city. I'm trying to be a good citizen, and I have those rights.
This is an area where you'll see Confederate flags and you'll see all kinds of white supremacist keywords. How does that make you feel?
Well, I've seen that a lot in Delaware. And I'm gonna tell you, I drove in a community one time in Delaware and I was lost and I was looking for my own cousin to try, who lived in this community. I was afraid to get out of the car and ask anybody, hey, can you tell me how to get to this address? Because there were so many Confederate flags. When I saw them in Sunbury, and then you would see the Confederate flag and you'd see a Trump flag. Well, you kind of knew that they were identifying with white supremacists. Um, Everyone is entitled to their own beliefs. That's what life is about. You have an opinion, I have an opinion. As long as you don't hurt me, everything's okay. But I rather know how you think than not to know how you think. So if that's your way of expressing yourself, then I know the person who you are. Does that make sense?
Sure, sure. Did you ever, you said, you gave me a little bit of your background with your son. Did you ever talk to your son about when he was growing up, look, be careful, you have to be, I've heard that Black
No.
Americans had that conversation with their son saying, be careful.
In New York City, you had to be careful for them being in the schoolyard and getting shot for maybe talking to somebody else's girlfriend. So when my son was coming up, I didn't feel that conversation in New York City because my family and I chipped in together to send my son to a private school in New Jersey. So he was exposed to white people there. And I have to tell you the funniest thing, where we thought all the crime was going to be in the Bronx and where he was going to public schools, he learned a lot of crime in the private school. He learned things at the private school that he wasn't learn. He learned how to hustle from the in the private school than he did when he was going to public school.
You said you came here to be with your grandchildren. Did you ever have that kind of conversation with your girls, your grandchildren?
No,
How old were they when you came here?
the little one was 6, and the other one was, like I said, about 14. And I just have to say that I, if somebody said something to me that's ugly, it kind of just went this way and went out. It didn't make me angry or affect me because the bottom line is, what are you doing for me? What can you do for me? You're not paying my bills. You know, so I kind of rationalized it. instead of taking it that um, I don't know. I've had people say to me, I don't need you to tell me about my civil rights. Well, that's good too, you know. So um, I just can't say that I've really gotten offended or someone using the term you people. Well, you people could be used as you people just as well. So I didn't let things like that upset me.
I wonder if that toughness comes from the fact that you did live in Washington and you are from New York, and maybe
I
someone
think
would.
it came from the New York area because in New York, you know what? I'm going to take you back. I grew up in Hollis. I did go to elementary school in Hollis. And I can, in elementary school, after school, there was a pizza shop that everyone went to on their way home. The blacks could not go inside the pizza shop until the white kids were through. And I remember going inside one time anyway, and that's when I was told that we were not allowed in there until the white people left.
Oh, is that in New York?
That was in Hollis, yeah.
Wow. How old are you?
10, about 10, 11 years old. So that is something that will come to that's the only thing that would really stand out for me.
Regina, do you feel accepted in this area now? Do you feel accepted? Do you feel comfortable now?
Mm.
Been here 14 years.
I must feel comfortable. I haven't sold my home and ran away yet, but um, I I feel as comfortable as I would any other place. I can't say that I don't feel comfortable. So I'm going to say I feel okay. I'm okay.
What do you think about this reinvigoration of the Black Lives Movement now?
I am so happy to pass the baton. Because I integrated an all-white school. I don't know if you know Richmond Hill High School,
Yep.
and that was in Queens.
Yep.
And they came to my junior high school and they asked for volunteers, and I volunteered. And I was living in the South Bronx, and I had to travel 2 hours to school every morning and 2 hours back. And so I've been doing this for a long time. And a lot of times when I would go to meetings where, there's so many different groups here in this area, and everybody, they have a good heart, they have good intentions, but it's almost like, hey, I've been doing this for a long time, and I know it's going to still take a long time before we could actually change this world or change how Americans think. And I'm happy that they continue to do it more than a day or 2 days. The bottom line is to really affect any change, you got to affect that money. You got to get to that. Once you get to that money, that green, the bottom line, then people really start jumping on board. So you can see that the longevity is change because the companies that are making money and they know that black people spend a lot of money on your little Nikes and certain designer clothes. So these companies are now coming on board, and that is what's going to make the change. But I am happy to see, and there's still older people out there as well. But this is about the young people. It's their time.
You grew up through a time where you saw an awful lot of civil rights action, racism action. How pervasive of a problem do you see racism in the valley today through your eyes? I realize you don't. It may not affect you the same that it affects everybody else, but how pervasive is it? Do you think?
More than I've seen in my lifetime, or more than I can say affected me. And when I say that, what was it, 2017, somebody was stapling racist signs throughout the city. I had never seen anything like that, you know. Um, as far as living in a city with the Confederate flags, there were a lot of flags coming up, and I'm very happy to say that most of them have gone down. But again, they had their right. Um, I was disappointed one time in 2017, and I hate this white and black thing, but a white woman that I respected thought she was a very nice person, and she made a comment, and I have to tell you, it kind of shook me. You know, I had to kind of go like that because she surprised me when she saw black people walking up the block. It was during one of the festivals. And she said, in reference to when they come into our area, they're supposed to embrace our culture. And that kind of triggered something to me because, well, what did white people do when they came to this country? You know, they misled everyone by making them think that we were all human and going to treat each other like humans, and then they invaded and they enslaved, and they didn't really embrace anyone's culture. They came in and they brought in and forced their own culture. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you ever thought about packing up and going somewhere else?
Several times. And don't think I'm not always looking. I am always on my computer looking for places to move.
What makes you keep looking?
Because I don't want to die in Sunbury. I just, it's not a place that I think I would want my remains. But I'm going to be cremated anyway, but I just I don't have that feeling that it's a place I want to grow old and die.
What would you say to younger people of color growing up in this area? If you know you could have somebody listening to you, what would you tell them?
But one of the quotes that I heard said today was, we should all want to be better because of our contributions to humanity. How have you improved humanity? And to know that you are better off because you helped someone. So we should all still consider ourselves as human beings. It's hard to let go of the color thing because it's in our DNA. It's been here so long, you know. But just try to help someone instead of pulling them down like crabs in a barrel. Just try to lift someone up.